There comes a moment in an empath's life that doesn't look dramatic from the outside, but inside it feels like everything is collapsing at once. It's not one big betrayal or one loud argument that causes it. It's quieter than that. It's the accumulation of everything they've been holding in for far too long. Every time they said it's okay when it wasn't. Every time they stayed silent just to keep the peace. Every time they absorbed someone else's pain while ignoring their own. It builds slowly, almost invisibly, until one day it becomes too heavy to carry. And the hardest part is empaths don't even realize it at first. They're so used to being the strong one, the understanding one, the one who listens, the one who gives, that they don't notice how much it's costing them. They start feeling tired all the time, but they call it just stress. Their mind won't stop racing at night, replaying conversations, analyzing emotions that were never theirs to begin with. They feel drained after being around certain people, but they convince themselves it's normal. They keep showing up, keep pouring, keep giving even when they are completely empty inside. Until something shifts, it's subtle but powerful. One day, they walk away from a conversation and instead of just feeling tired, they feel something deeper. A quiet frustration, a question they can no longer ignore. Why do I always feel worse after being there for others? And that question begins to open their eyes. They start noticing patterns. How some people only come to them when they need comfort, but disappear when the empath needs the same. How their kindness is expected, not appreciated. How their presence is used, not valued. And that's when the realization hits not everyone deserves access to their energy. It's a painful truth, because empaths love deeply. They don't give halfway. So accepting that some people are taking more than they're giving feels like betrayal, not just from others, but from themselves for allowing it. But this awareness is the beginning of something powerful, because for the first time, the empath starts questioning the roles they've been playing: the constant fixer, the emotional caretaker, the one who holds everything together while quietly falling apart. They begin to understand that peace isn't something you find by keeping everyone else happy. Peace is something you protect, even if it means disappointing people, even if it means stepping back, even if it means letting go of connections that once felt important. And in that moment, something inside them changes, not loudly, not dramatically, but deeply. They begin to realize that their energy is not unlimited, their heart is not a place for everyone to rest, and their silence is not an invitation for others to take more. And that's where the journey begins, the moment the noise finally becomes too expensive to ignore. And just when the empath begins to pull back, just when they finally choose a little space, a little silence, a little distance, something unexpected rises to the surface. It's not relief, not at first. It's guilt. A deep, uncomfortable guilt that sits heavy on their chest. Because for so long they've been taught, directly or indirectly, that their worth is tied to how much they give. That being a good person means always being available, always understanding, always putting others first. So the moment they choose themselves, even in the smallest way, it feels wrong. It feels like they're doing something they're not supposed to do. They start questioning their own decisions. Am I being too cold? Am I overreacting? Maybe they didn't mean it like that. The mind begins to defend the very people who drained them. Not because those people deserve it, but because the empath has been conditioned to protect others, even at their own expense. And that's the trap, because guilt has a way of pulling them back into the same cycles they're trying to escape. It whispers things like, just give them another chance, or don't be so distant, they need you. And for a moment, the empath feels the urge to go back, to reply to that message, to check in again, to reopen a door they just closed. Not because it feels right, but because it feels familiar. But something is different now. This time, even with the guilt, there's awareness. A quiet voice beneath the noise that says, you've felt this before, and you know where it leads. And that awareness creates a pause. A space between the feeling and the reaction. And in that space, the empath begins to see the truth more clearly than ever before. They begin to realize that choosing themselves is not an act of selfishness, it's an act of survival. That guilt they feel, it doesn't mean they're doing something wrong, it means they're doing something new. They're breaking a pattern that once defined them. They're stepping out of a role that kept them stuck. And of course it feels uncomfortable, because growth always does when it challenges everything you've been taught to believe about yourself. They start to understand that constantly abandoning their own needs to meet everyone else's was never love. It was self-neglect disguised as kindness. And real love, true healthy love, doesn't require you to lose yourself just to keep someone else comfortable. Slowly, that guilt begins to lose its grip. Not all at once, but little by little. Each time they choose not to overextend. Each time they say no without over-explaining. Each time they sit with the discomfort instead of running back to what's familiar, they become stronger, more grounded, more certain. And eventually, what once felt like guilt starts to transform into something else of self-respect. Because they finally see it clearly, choosing peace over people isn't selfish, it's necessary. And as the empath continues to create space, something begins to happen that they didn't expect. The fog starts to lift. For so long, their vision was shaped by emotion, by empathy, by understanding, by the constant urge to see the good in everyone no matter the cost. But now, with a little distance, with a little silence, they begin to see people not for who they hoped they were, but for who they truly are. It's not an easy shift. In fact, it's one of the most painful parts of the journey, because clarity doesn't just reveal the truth about others, it also reveals the truth about everything the empath tolerated, excused, and overlooked. Conversations start to replay in their mind, but this time, they see the subtle manipulation hidden behind certain words. They recognize the imbalance in relationships they once called normal. They notice how often they were the one giving, the one reaching out, the one trying to hold things together, and it hits differently now. They begin to see how some people only showed up when they needed something, emotional support, validation, attention, but were nowhere to be found when the empath needed the same. They see how their kindness became predictable, expected, even taken for granted. And perhaps the hardest realization of all, they start to understand that some people were never truly there for them, only for what they could get from them. That truth cuts deep, because empaths don't connect on the surface. When they care fully, they invest their time, their energy, their heart. So realizing that certain connections were one-sided or built on convenience rather than genuine care feels like a loss, not just of the person, but of the version of the relationship they believed in. For a moment, they might even question themselves. How did I not see this before? But the answer is simple. They did see it. They just chose to understand it instead of accepting it. They gave people the benefit of the doubt again and again because that's who they are. They saw potential where there was inconsistency. They saw good intentions where there were repeated patterns. But now, something has changed. Now, they're no longer looking through the lens of who someone could be. They're seeing them for who they consistently show themselves to be. And that shift is powerful because it removes the illusion. It replaces emotional attachment with clarity. It allows the empath to separate feelings from facts. And with that clarity comes a new kind of strength. They no longer feel the need to chase explanations or force connections to make sense. They stop overanalyzing every detail, trying to fix what was never theirs to fix. Instead, they start trusting what they see. They start honoring what they feel without dismissing it. And most importantly, they start accepting that not every connection is meant to last, no matter how deeply they once felt it. Because sometimes, the most important truth an empath can face is this: not everyone they loved was meant to stay in their life. And as this clarity settles in, the empath begins to respond differently, not with confrontation, not with long explanations, but with something far more powerful: silence. Not the kind of silence that comes from fear or avoidance, but a deliberate, grounded silence. The kind that says, I see everything now, and I choose not to engage the same way anymore. At first, this feels unnatural. The empath has spent so much of their life explaining themselves, over-communicating, trying to make others understand their intentions, their feelings, their heart. They were always the one to clear the air, to fix misunderstandings, to keep the connection alive. So when they stop doing that, when they choose quiet over reaction, it almost feels like they're betraying their own nature. But this silence is different. It's not suppression. It's protection. Instead of reacting immediately, they pause. Instead of answering every message, they take their time. Instead of jumping in to fix someone else's emotional chaos, they step back and observe. And in that space, they begin to realize something powerful. Not everything requires their response. Not everything deserves their energy. Distance starts to grow, not out of anger, but out of awareness. The empath no longer feels the need to be constantly available. They begin to understand that just because someone reaches out doesn't mean they're obligated to respond in the same way. Just because someone is used to having access to them doesn't mean they still get to. And this is where things begin to shift externally. People notice. Those who are comfortable with the empath always being there start to feel the difference. The late night emotional dumping no longer gets the same response. The subtle manipulation no longer works the same way. The constant need for attention is no longer being fed. And suddenly, the same people who benefited from the empath's openness begin to react. Some become confused. Some try harder to pull the empath back in. Some even get upset, accusing them of changing, of being distant, of not caring the way they used to. But what they're really reacting to is the loss of control, the loss of access to a version of the empath that no longer exists. And for the first time, the empath doesn't rush to fix that perception. They don't over-explain. They don't try to prove their goodness. They don't shrink themselves just to make others comfortable again. Instead, they stay grounded in their silence, in their distance, in their decision to protect their peace. Because they now understand something they didn't before. People will often only question your behavior when it no longer benefits them. This realization doesn't make the empath cold. It makes them aware. It teaches them that their energy is valuable and not everyone is entitled to it. It shows them that stepping back isn't losing connection. It's gaining clarity about who truly respects their boundaries and who only respected their availability. And in that quiet, in that space they've created, healing begins to take root, because sometimes the most powerful thing an empath can do is say nothing at all. And as the empath continues to choose distance, to protect their energy, to no longer pour into places that leave them empty, a new reality begins to form around them. It's quieter now. The phone doesn't ring as often. The messages become fewer. The constant noise of other people's needs, emotions, and expectations slowly fades into the background. And in that silence, as something unfamiliar appears, loneliness. Not because they don't have value, not because they're not loved, but because they've stepped away from what was once familiar. For so long, their identity was tied to being needed, being present, being the one everyone could rely on. So when that role begins to dissolve, it leaves behind a space that feels empty at first. They might sit alone and wonder if they made the right decision. They might question if peace is supposed to feel this quiet, this still. Because they were so used to emotional intensity, to constant interaction, to being surrounded by people, even if those connections were draining. Now, without that noise, it almost feels like something is missing. But what's missing isn't connection, it's chaos, and that realization doesn't come immediately. It unfolds slowly, gently over time. The empath begins to notice that even though things are quieter, they're no longer as overwhelmed. Their mind isn't racing the same way it used to. They're not carrying the weight of everyone else's emotions on their shoulders. They can sit in a moment without feeling pulled in 10 different directions. And in that quiet, they start to reconnect with something they've neglected for so long themselves. They begin to enjoy their own presence. Simple things start to feel different. Peaceful mornings, uninterrupted thoughts, moments of stillness that once felt uncomfortable now begin to feel grounding. They start listening to their own needs, their own feelings, without immediately pushing them aside for someone else. And with that comes a deeper sense of fulfillment. Because the empath realizes that being surrounded by people doesn't always mean being fulfilled, and being alone doesn't always mean being empty. In fact, this space they've created, this distance they once feared, is now becoming the foundation for something stronger, self-respect. They start to understand that real connection doesn't drain you. It doesn't make you question your worth. It doesn't leave you feeling exhausted after every interaction. And because they've experienced what it feels like to lose themselves in others, they now recognize the importance of protecting what they've rebuilt within. So the loneliness begins to change shape. It's no longer heavy or painful. It becomes peaceful. It becomes intentional. It becomes a space where the empath can grow, heal, and exist without pressure. And from that place, they no longer feel the need to fill the silence with just anyone. They become more selective, more aware, more aligned with the kind of energy they allow into their life. Because now they know peace may feel lonely in the beginning, but it's where they finally find themselves. And after everything they've walked through, the exhaustion, the guilt, the clarity, the distance, the loneliness, something begins to settle within the empath that feels different from anything they've known before. It's not loud. It's not something they need to prove. It's a quiet, steady sense of control over themselves, an inner calm that doesn't shake as easily as it once did. This is where the real transformation happens. Because the empath who once reacted to everything, every tone change, every shift in energy, every unspoken emotion, no longer feels the need to. Situations that would have pulled them in before, that would have consumed their thoughts for hours or even days, now pass through them without the same impact. It's not that they don't feel anymore, it's that they're no longer controlled by what they feel. They've learned the difference between empathy and emotional responsibility. Before, they carried everything. If someone was upset, they felt responsible for fixing it. If something felt off, they assumed it was their job to make it right. But now they understand that just because they can feel something doesn't mean it belongs to them. Just because they understand someone's pain doesn't mean they have to absorb it. And that understanding changes everything. They start to move differently, speak less, but with more intention, give less, but with more awareness, react less, but with more control. There's a calmness in the way they handle situations now, a grounded energy that doesn't chase, doesn't beg, doesn't try to force outcomes. They've stepped out of survival mode and into self-possession. And people notice this too, but this time, the reaction is different. Some are drawn to it because there's something powerful about someone who is no longer easily shaken. Others may feel uncomfortable because they can no longer access the empath in the same way they used to. The emotional triggers that once worked no longer get the same response. The guilt no longer lands the same way. The empath has become steady, centered, almost untouchable in a way that isn't cold, but deeply self-aware. And that's the key. This isn't about building walls or shutting people out. It's about building a foundation within that is so strong, so rooted in self-understanding that outside chaos no longer has the power to disrupt it. The empath doesn't need to prove their worth anymore. They don't need constant validation. They don't need to hold on to connections that don't align with who they've become. They've learned to walk away without explanation, to stay silent without guilt, to choose peace without needing permission. And in doing so, they've stepped into the most powerful version of themselves, not the one who gives endlessly, not the one who sacrifices everything for others, but the one who knows exactly when to give and exactly when to let go. Because true strength for an empath isn't in how much they can carry, it's in knowing what is no longer theirs to hold.